Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's How to Work with USAID session as a part of this conference. It's really a pleasure to be with you. My name is Matt Johnson. I'm the industry liaison for USAID, as well as the communications director in the Office of Acquisition Assistance. And I'm joined by my colleague, Paul Burford, who's a deputy director in our Bureau for Development, Democracy and Innovations, LIFT Hub, or the Local Faith and Transformative Partnership Hub. So what we wanted to do today is just really give you kind of an overview of how to partner with the agency. I know you've had a number of different sessions as a part of the event today. And so we wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper in kind of to the partnership process and really understand what does it mean to work with USAID. Throughout the presentation today, we'll be sharing a number of different links and resources that we can make sure with the event organizers you get a copy to as well. So please be sure if you're looking at the chat box or you've got access to that, we can follow up with some of the links as well. And then also while we're going through the conversation, feel free to drop any questions you have into the chat box while we're talking. Be happy to answer questions afterwards or even while we're going through the presentation. So what we wanted to do today is just really kind of talk a little bit about the agency as a whole, just to provide a little bit of a foundation about who we are as an organization and kind of what does it mean as an organization for the partnership process. Then we'll dive a little bit deeper into kind of some of the specifics about partnering with USAID. We'll share some of the ways to stay connected to my team and to the agency as a whole. We'll also walk you through our new platform, workwithusaid.org, before we kind of open it up for questions. So that's just a little bit about what we're hoping to talk to during our session today. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about USAID. You know, USAID has a unique culture and mission of how we operate. I think oftentimes many organizations or individuals come to us kind of thinking us as a foundation or sort of a grant-making agency. But really, we're a development organization that's obviously a part of the US government that has long-term priorities in every country and every space that we're working in. And so really, as a part of our mission and goal, what we're looking for is organizations that can help us support our sort of overarching goals and objectives as an organization. And so it's important to really understand kind of who we are, like I said, as an organization, if you're interested in partnering with us. You know, as an agency, we have a variety of different sectors. We work all over the world in a variety of different places, in a variety of different areas. So, you know, when disaster strikes around the world, USAID is there responding to the disasters. We have a significant portfolio in health, working in HIV/AIDS and COVID-19 response. We also support democratic programs. We do empowering of women and girls, and then work to catalyze innovations and partnerships. So we have programs across every sector against all different areas, whether it's agriculture, like I said, democracy, human rights and governance, water, global health, etc. You can learn a lot more about all the different types of programs that USAID does on our website. But we really have programs that touch just about every area and every facet of society around the world. And if you're not familiar with our team, you can see a little bit more, just sort of a regionally or a map of where we're located and how we operate. So we have a small team that's based in Washington, D.C., but really the bulk of our staff are located overseas, working in the countries and communities that we're operating in. One of the things I love about USAID is a significant portion of our workforce. I think around 2/3 of our workforce are actually what we call foreign service nationals, or people that are from the countries and communities that we are operating in. Just a little bit of terminology you might hear us talk about while we're on the webinar. If you're even engaging with USAID, we often call our offices overseas missions. And so you can see here where we have different missions, as well as where we have programs, but maybe not necessarily an office around the world. So just to give you a little bit of sense of kind of where we're operating as an organization. But one of the things I want to talk about is really sort of like our operating framework, how we as an organization operate, how we do development, and really how that connects to our partnership process. So first and foremost, the most important thing I think to understand is sort of the program cycle. This is really our guiding framework of how we do our development work. It's how we identify priorities in countries. It's how we identify what are the challenges in the communities that we're operating in. It identifies how we design and develop and implement programs around the world, and as well as how we learn from those programs and incorporate that feedback into the work that we're doing. And so if you're interested in kind of getting an understanding of how sort of USAID does development, I encourage you to take a look at our program cycle. it's a really helpful guide to kind of understand sort of how USAID does development. Sort of related to that, we have a number of policies, strategies, frameworks, and visions that really guide our work from a holistic perspective. So, for example, we have a water strategy. This water strategy is developed by our water team based in Washington, D.C., but then really looks at, we as an organization, as an agency, what are the areas that we want to invest in with regards to water across the world. We have strategies related to gender inclusion. We have strategies related to how we partner. We have a number of different strategies, like I said, frameworks and visions that really guide us as an organization. And so if you're practitioner that's interested in a specific area or a sector of how USAID operates, oftentimes it's helpful to get an understanding of looking at our strategy for how we do higher education work, just to understand kind of what our priorities are. But really the most important document or resource I want to mention during the webinar today that I hope you go back and take a look at are something called our country development cooperation strategies. And as I mentioned earlier, USAID is not just sort of a grant maker or a foundation that sort of hands out money to anyone that comes to us. We have country-specific plans and strategies, or what we call our CDCSs, that really outline and govern all of the work that we as an organization do across the world. So all of our CDCSs are available on our website. I think my colleague Alexandria just dropped a link to them in the chat box, but we have a CDCS for every country that we operate in. That CDCS really governs all of our work in every country that we're working in. It'll talk about geographic areas, sectoral areas, and even our overarching goals and objectives of what we're trying to do as an organization. And so we're looking for partners. We're looking for organizations to work with, organizations that are interested in partnering with us. Really what we're looking for is sort of that alignment between what our CDCS is doing and what maybe you as an organization are doing. And so I really encourage, if you have a specific country or area, geographic region that you're interested in partnering with USAID, go on and take a look at the country development cooperation strategy to get a sense of what USAID is doing and maybe see how that aligns to your work of what you're doing. I think in a good and bad way, I meet with a lot of organizations, but oftentimes the work that they're doing isn't necessarily in alignment with what USAID's priorities are, or what we're doing in a country. And so it's really important for you to identify those synergies between the two. I think ultimately we wish we had more money to be able to help support all the programs everywhere around the world, but with sometimes a limited budget and limited capacity, we have to be very strategic about what we're doing. But our CDCSs are typically go out for about 5 years, so you can get a good sense of what the agency is planning on doing and how we operate. And then finally, one of the things I'll mention is something called our ADS, or Automated Directive Systems. It's really our operating policies and procedures. If you're ever looking for a funding opportunity or looking for funding, you'll sometimes see references to ADS 303 or ADS 300 or ADS 320. Those are really just our operating frameworks or procedures. And so just an acronym that's important for you to be aware of. So I want to pause here and now turn it over to my colleague, Paul, just to talk a little bit about sort of how we as an organization fund our work before we dive into some of the partnership processes. So Paul, over to you.
Great, thanks, Matt. And I want to just say I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you for having me. And Matt, thank you for kicking us off. We can't do much here at the agency without funding, right? So one of the things that we do is work very closely with Congress and the executive office of the president to establish our budget. And it can be a very complicated process, but funding comes from the American people. It comes from taxpayer dollars, right? So in order to do that, we have to negotiate with Congress and negotiate with the Office of Management and Budget in order to get that budget. So the process can be very interesting. There's a lot of different flavors of money, we'll call it. Typically, the money that you'll see at USAID is what's called 2-year money, meaning that we have 2 years to spend it once we get it. But it's also interesting because just now, I'll tell you, we just started finishing the back and forth with Congress and OMB on the fiscal year 2024 budget, which most of it will be 2-year money. But the interesting part is we typically don't get it until a year into the cycle. So that's why you'll see, if you're familiar with USAID, you'll see this push to get dollars out by the end of the fiscal year, and it's a big rush to do so. And a lot of times that's because USAID only has typically less than a year to spend it. So I just want to point out, we're also planning years in advance. Like I just said, we just started doing the back and forth on the fiscal year 2024 budget, we won't see that money until calendar year of 2025. And we'll have until the September 30th of 2025 to obligate those funds. So we're already planning 3 years out, even as we're talking today. So it's just interesting. And we use these, once we get the approval from Congress that sets the agency funding levels, we go back to what Matt was talking about with the CDCSs, where then we take that money and look at the development objectives that we have, and say, okay, what do we want to do in the next year or two, and how are we going to get there? And typically, in most cases, that's through a contract or a grant or a cooperative agreement. And that's where you'll see the final block there, where partners compete for USAID funding through an RF or a request for applications, or a request for proposals, or a request for quotes. We can move on to the next slide. Partnering with USAID. Our partners are very important to us. We partner with more than 3,500 U.S. and non-U.S. organizations around the world, and we have different types of partners all over the place. I mean, we, typically we're using contractors to do a lot of our staffing work in Washington and overseas, and we're partnering with universities to do research, and we're partnering with organizations in the faith-based communities and diaspora groups. I'd say 60 to 70% of what we do is issue grants and cooperative agreements, and we'll get into what assistance and acquisition is in a moment. But that's kind of the bread and butter of what we do. And then we also work with, the UN organizations and things like that in order to get our funding out. So we have a very diverse group of partners. You may have seen a push lately talking through just USAID priorities, talking about getting 25% of our funding to local organizations. That's a huge part of what we do, and we value all these relationships very much. So on to the next slide, and I'll tell you a little bit about how we distribute those funds. And they are typically through two different types of ways. And one of them is through acquisition, and the other is through assistance. So when you hear of acquisition, that's typically when the agency is purchasing something. So say, for example, the agency needs in Washington 80 staff members to help run a program. That's going to be through an acquisition or a contract. And those are all listed. All of our requests for proposals, requests for information are all listed on sam.gov, which used to be the Federal Business Opportunities website. It got merged into sam.gov. On the assistance side of things, we're talking about typically a grant or a cooperative agreement. And those are essentially, the purpose of those is to fund an organization's ongoing activities. Yes, we make sure they align with USAID development objectives, but the purpose is to carry out a project that benefits a community, a local community, and typically it's something that an organization is already doing. So those opportunities are listed on grants.gov, and they're listed as notices of funding opportunities. We can move on.
Yeah, and I think just one thing I'll note just on acquisition versus assistance, I think typically what we see is sort of for-profit organizations. If you're a company, a small business, you work with us through an acquisition or a contract. And if you're a not-for-profit organization or NGO, you typically work with USAID through an assistance mechanism, a grant or cooperative agreement. However, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to. If you're a not-for-profit organization, you can always work with USAID as a contract, and vice versa. But I think it's important to note that this is where all of USAID's funding opportunities are posted on sam.gov and grants.gov. You can go on there today and find any number of different funding opportunities available related to USAID. One thing that I did want to cover is something called our business forecast. I'm not sure if any of you are on here. We actually did a quarterly business forecast call earlier this morning. But what we have was at something at USAID called a business forecast, that basically before any funding opportunity is posted on grants.gov or sam.gov, we have an internal requirement that basically says we need to notify our partner community, notify industry of what we are planning on doing. And so you can see here an example of a project in Colombia that USAID is planning on doing later this year. If you go onto our business forecast webpage, you can find about, I think, 260 different upcoming programs and activities around the world that we as an agency are planning on implementing or looking for partners for in the coming year. There's a host of different information that's available on the business forecasts, information such as when we anticipate releasing a solicitation, a little bit more information about the activity, et cetera. And you can find all of that information here. Within USAID, if you're interested in partnering with us, we really encourage you to take a look at the business forecast on a regular basis. The forecast is actually updated daily. It pulls from our internal planning system that all of our staff use to actually track and manage all of their different programs and activities. And so it has a lot of really great updated information about what the agency is planning on doing. And it gives you an opportunity to really think through, like, hey, is this a program or activity that we want to potentially apply for or send a proposal to USAID around? Also gives you an opportunity to maybe connect with other organizations and say, hey, who else is working in Colombia around economic growth and trade that we could maybe potentially partner together with. And so really encourage you to take a look at the forecast because it provides just a wealth of information for all of USAID's upcoming funding opportunities around the world. And then with that, we each quarter we do what we call a business forecast and partner update engagement. Like I mentioned, we did our first one this morning. Before the event, we go out and we solicit questions from our partner community. I think we answered somewhere around 1,200 questions around every upcoming funding opportunity in the agency. We actually will be posting those responses to all those questions on our website in just a little bit later today. But like I said, it's a really important resource and tool, and I'd really encourage you to take a look at that. So with that, I want to turn it over to Paul to talk about just a couple of other partnership programs that exist in the agency.
Thanks, Matt. And yeah, just a second, what Matt's saying about the business forecast is such a great tool for industry and implementing partners to look at and just know what's coming up. And please use that when there is a call for Q&A. Use it, because this is a way that we can help to communicate with our implementing partners some of the intentions behind some of our new and upcoming opportunities. So just talking about opportunities, these are some additional partnership programs that we have that are somewhat unique to the agency. They're not your standard just RFP or RFA. They do end up being cooperative agreements, grants, or contracts. But there's a couple just to note, and then one of them is Development Innovation Ventures. And this is a really unique program because not only can organizations apply for funds, and this is there's a tiered approach. I mean, I think there's like a pilot phase and then like an implementation phase and then a research phase. So it's really interesting, but not only can organizations apply for funding, but individuals can also apply for funding too, which is pretty unique. So I think Alex just shared the website. Check it out. There's something on there called an annual program statement or an APS, and that's going to be what you can click on to look through what you would need to submit, and then what the agency would evaluate you on. There's also a program that we've just recently kind of reinvigorated called the New Partnerships Initiative. And it's aimed at lowering the barriers for new partners. And this is not just local partners, but we're talking about U.S. small businesses and faith-based organizations as well. So it's a really cool opportunity where we're just trying to, again, we know that it's difficult sometimes to even get, your application considered sometimes, or you don't know where, where it is or what's going on. Just use this to help kind of guide you through that. We have another program called American Schools and Hospitals Abroad, which is, I think sometimes we talk about this as the predecessor, or it predates USAID itself. And it's actually one of USAID's only diplomacy programs. Typically, diplomacy programs are done through the State Department. So this is just another cool program we have overseas where we partner with a U.S. organization and then local civil society organizations to help build schools, build hospitals, but not only just build them. It's not just construction activities, but add certain types of equipment or things like that they need. So that's another interesting program. And then the last one I'll mention is the Local Works program, which is basically, it's interesting because it's kind of the opposite of what you would think. We have missions actually apply to Washington for funding. But the cool part about it is that it's sector agnostic. So it can be, some missions might only have global health money, but they want to do something else, around, something related to global health, but wouldn't really necessarily be covered by global health funding. Local Works funding is something they can apply for that will help them, with their development objectives, but also it just provides innovative ways to basically partner with local partners and continue that good work. And the cool part about it is, we talked about earlier about 2-year money. Local Works funding is 5-year money. So we actually have a little bit more time to spend it and kind of think through more about how we're going to use it. Yeah, so there's just a couple little partnership things there. Matt,
Yeah,
back
I
to you.
wanted to, I think, Paul, we've got a couple questions that come in.
Oh, sure.
Some of them, I think, for the end, but I think one of the questions that came through is actually pretty relevant to this slide and some of what you were just talking about. But the question is, what advice would you provide to new potential partners to give them the best chance or success of receiving funding from USAID?
Yeah.
And I'll maybe start that, and maybe you can feel free to add on to it as well. I think that there are a number of different ways and different parts of the agency that you could potentially partner with. But one of the things I think you'll see in both the DIV program, the New Partnerships Initiative program, and other programs in the agency is when USAID will call for concept notes to a program. So the New Partnerships Initiative and DIV program do this, where we'll issue kind of a broad, what we call an annual program statement, or APS. And then with that, we'll have specific calls for concept notes. And oftentimes a concept note is just a simple 3 to 5 page document requirement to provide to us. Give us your ideas. And oftentimes it's say, hey, we've got a challenge. We're trying to figure out this education challenge in Kenya. What ideas do you have for us to help us solve this particular challenge? And I personally think like those are some of the best opportunities and best ways for potential new partners to kind of get your foot in the door. Because rather than competing with, some of the other like more challenging parts of the application process of, submitting past performance and submitting financial information, it really focuses on like, what's your idea? How do we move your idea forward? And if we like your idea, then we can bring you in and kind of work with you hand in hand and walk you through that process. You can learn a little bit more about that if you go to our New Partnerships Initiative page. But as a new partner, I would be on the lookout for what we call addendum or rounds to an annual program statement, where we call for concept notes. And you can find all of those on grants.gov. I actually think if you go on our New Partnerships Initiative website, we've got 2 open calls right now for concept notes, both I think related in the higher education sector, that I'd encourage you to take a look at. But I don't know, Paul, what are your thoughts? Do you have any other thoughts on, what are some of the best chances of success for new partners?
Yeah, and it kind of goes into what we're about to talk about on the next slide as well. So it's a very greatly timed question. Matt's exactly right. It is, I can't lie and say that it's easy for new partners to get in the door, right? So, that's why the agency has been running through and just trying to say, how can we reduce the barriers to entry? And just one of the things that I would say is, also use your networks, because, it's hard to even just start an organization and get into this game. But at the same time, it's like not everybody wants to be a prime partner of USAID. So I would say, establish your networks. If you see something like an industry day, what they're called, where we get partners together before they're going to issue a full solicitation, go to that. It's a great way to connect in the space. And maybe you'll find that maybe a subawarding relationship is maybe the better option for my first couple times. That way I don't have that direct relationship with USAID, and I kind of have the cover of a prime awardee, and they can also help you be a mentor in a way. So I think that's a really good way to kind of break down that barrier, with the understanding that yes, it is difficult to do that. However, like Matt was saying about the concept notes, it really is, one of the best ways to kind of get your foot in the door, because the concept notes typically are pretty short and don't ask for a ton of the information that would be requested of in a full application, which can be, end up being hundreds of pages long sometimes, So I think if you see a request for a concept note and it's an area that your organization works in and you're interested in submitting it, I say just go for it. It really is a good way. I mean, some other tips for submitting an application or a proposal is like the most basic one. Read the entire solicitation carefully. And that might sound like a no-brainer, but sometimes, I mean, I hate to do this to you, but some of these things are 100 pages long themselves, the solicitations. So, I mean, I think USAID could do a better job of definitely reducing kind of like the frivolous information in there. Like, what do we actually need? What are we asking for? I think we've done a great job of that over the past couple of years. But in the past, I have seen solicitations that are literally 100 pages long. Another one of the best things you can do is during that Q&A period, there's always going to be a Q&A period. 99% of the time, there's going to be a question and answer period when a solicitation is put out on the street. Please, 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 I beg you, and ask those questions that you have. I mean, there's, what we do after we receive the questions is we go through every single one of them and then answer them and then ask ourselves, does the solicitation need to be revised in order to accommodate some of these questions? And you'd be surprised how many things can get changed in a solicitation because somebody pointed things out that said, well, actually, we think that instead of a, firm fixed price contract, this needs to be a cost reimbursement contract. And then they tell us why. And we say, oh, okay, you know what? That actually does make sense because of these factors. So we really do use those. So I say, please, when you are reading through the solicitation, if you have questions, submit them because we will answer them. So in any solicitation, you're going to have three things that are the most critical thing to you. The first critical piece is, what do they actually want? What does the agency want? What do they need? That's called the statement of work, or the what's it called? Project description, program description. The second one would be the instructions. Okay, now they've told me what they want me to do. Now, how do they want to receive the information? And that's the instructions, right? And the most critical part at the end is the evaluation criteria. So they're going to tell you what the agency is looking for. They're going to tell you what they want to see, and then they're going to tell you how they're going to evaluate what they're going to see. The agency will never evaluate something, well, they're not supposed to evaluate anything that they didn't tell you they would evaluate. So what you want to do is just make sure you understand the instructions and those evaluation criteria very soundly, because that is exactly what the agency is going to look at. They won't be evaluating anything that they're not asking for. So make sure you understand those. And if there is something you don't understand, that goes back to that Q&A period. Please come back and ask the agency for clarification. The worst thing we can do is just not respond to you. I'm kidding. We always try to respond to them. The other thing is, I think this is really important. Be specific and do not let USAID make assumptions, because say you're an organization that's worked with the agency, you have 100 contracts with the agency. You're not supposed to necessarily use that information in making a decision. So, I mean, don't assume that we know the great work you've done in a country. You have to explain it in your concept paper or your proposal or whatever it may be. And then the last is, like we were talking about a little bit about earlier, consider partnering with an organization that has experience with USAID. Those subawarding relationships are critical to the success of most projects or most awards. And that can be a way for a newer organization to learn, to have some, like, a bit of a mentor type situation, but also being able to continue to do the great work that you do. So I'm happy to answer any questions further you may have about that as we get to the Q&A period, but I'll kick it back over to Matt.
Thanks. I know we've got a lot of questions coming in. I appreciate all the questions. I love seeing these. We'll definitely get to these questions after we go through just a couple more slides of information. Though I do want to talk a little bit about registration requirements to work with USAID or really any US government organization. So to be eligible for US funding, no matter the type of funding, there's only two places you have to be registered in: SAM and then CAGE or NCAGE. If you're a US-based organization, when you register in SAM, or the System for Award Management, you'll get what's called a unique entity ID, and it'll also assign you a CAGE code. If you are an organization that's not based in the United States, then you first have to get an NCAGE code before you can register in the SAM system. Unfortunately, neither of these systems are owned by USAID. They are sometimes a bit complex and challenging. And if any of you have tried to register in sam.gov to get a unique entity ID, you know the challenges that you may have experienced over the past year. But at the end of the day, these are really the only two registration requirements to partnering with USAID. We do have available on workwithusaid.org and as well as on our website, step-by-step guides of how to register in these systems. Like I said, they can be sometimes challenging, and part of what we have available on our website is a checklist of all the documents you need in advance of getting registered in these systems. But these are, at the end of the day, like I said, these are the only two systems that you must be required be registered in order to obtain funding from USAID. And I think technically, before you apply for a full proposal or application to USAID, you must have your registration in place. So if you're interested in partnering with us, I encourage you to take a look at these systems and getting registered in them now. If you are just submitting a concept note to USAID, you don't have to be fully registered in these systems, but we would, like I said, we would encourage you to begin the registration process for these. And I can try and find the link. I don't have the link, I think, immediately handy, but we have a step, like I said, a step-by-step guide and a blog on our workwithusaid.org platform that has basically all the resources you need, as well as a couple of webinars and tutorials of how to get registered in these systems. And so what I want to do real quick is just talk to you a little bit about our website, workwithusaid.org. I'm going to switch screens over to it. So we as an agency launched this website a little over a year ago. And really it came out of a lot of our work with the New Partnerships Initiative and efforts meeting with new partners to help organizations get a better understanding of how to partner with USAID. So like I mentioned, my team or my office is the industry liaison team. And really we serve as a front door to the agency for any organizations that interested in partnering with us. And my team, working closely with Paul's team, we created this platform, like I said, workwithusaid.org, that really serves as that front door for organizations to partner with USAID. And so there's a number of different resources on here I just want to quickly highlight before we go back to the presentation. So first and foremost, we have something called, it's a very simple checklist of, whether or not your organization is maybe a good fit for USAID. This is a helpful checklist that you can download. Just answer some basic questions from your organization about partnering with USAID, kind of what does it look like to partner with us. We have this checklist available in a number of different languages available on the website. So if English is not your first language and you're interested in kind of reading it in a different language, you can see that here. In a couple of different languages. You can download these resources. This is a really great place to start if you are totally new to the agency and really interested in kind of diving deeper into partnering with USAID. One of the other things that we launched with this website is something called a partner directory. So for us at USAID, we're always doing market research, trying to identify who are new organizations that are out there, who are potential organizations we can work with. We also want to be able to connect organizations to one another. So we launched this partner directory as really a way of trying to connect organizations to one another and allow you to kind of identify yourself to USAID. So within our partner directory, we have a number of different sectors, countries, as well as filters of how we can identify different organizations in it. So you can see here a couple of new organizations that have most recently added themselves to our partner directory. You can see that this organization operates in Liberia. You can see a link to their website, the type of organization, and who they are. And so I really want to encourage you, if you're on this call and you haven't done so yet, to add your organization to our partner directory. You can read a little bit more about the partner directory, but at the very top of it, if you click list your organization, you can get your organization listed in the directory. One of the great things, once you're in the directory, there's an in-messaging feature that allows you to message any other organization that's in the partner directory to connect with them. And so what we're hearing and what we're seeing is a lot of organizations are using the partner directory to actually help facilitate and connect with one another. You can search on here by different filter organizations. You can filter by organizations that have worked with USAID or have not worked with USAID before. And then search for those organizations and maybe identify organizations that have USAID experience that you could potentially partner with as a part of maybe approaching or coming to USAID. So it's a really helpful tool. Like I said, our own staff are using this as we're doing market research to identify different organizations we could potentially partner with. we're using this directory. So like I said, encourage you to add your organization into it. I think last time I looked, I think we have about 3,200 organizations from 140 different countries in the partner directory already. And we want to continue to see that expand so we can get to know who you are and allow you to connect with other organizations. One of the other really helpful tools we have as a part of our Work with USAID platform is something called a pre-engagement assessment. I think one of the questions I saw come in is a question about, building capacity or training or support for organizations to partner with USAID. So this pre-engagement assessment takes about 15 minutes, but it looks at different areas such as programming, compliance, human resources, program management, and budget and finance, and really looks at what are like some of the key kind of management structures we as an organization, or we at USAID are sometimes looking at for an organization to be able to manage US government funding, manage USAID funding. After you've completed this assessment, you will get a personalized guide for a personalized report for your organization on your ability, kind of readiness to be able to partner with USAID. So I just have a sample report here that I did, just kind of clicking through, and you can see you get a score for the different programming areas such as moderate, advanced, across each of the different areas. But one of the great things, though, this report will tell you some key findings about your organization, maybe some things that you can do to be in a better position to be able to compete for USAID funding. But really, one of the most helpful things is we have recommended actions that then take you to specific trainings and resources, online resources that we have created or other organizations have created that we know will help you kind of build your readiness and capacity to be able to manage either USAID funding or really just kind of help to build your organization as a whole. So there's a variety of different actions here. And so we encourage you, to go through, if you're new to USAID, take this pre-engagement assessment, take it back to your leadership at your organization, and go through and take some of these trainings to help build your capacity and readiness to be able to work with USAID. At the agency, we don't see anyone's report. These are totally anonymous reports for your organization, but you're welcome. You can see here, you can share the report, you can export the report and share it with others. Or even if you're interested in partnering and engaging with another organization, you guys can both take this pre-engagement assessment and share, a little bit more about your organization, your capacity, your structure, your setup, to get to know other organizations. Obviously, closely related to the pre-engagement assessment is our library of resources. This is really a curated list of resources that we've gone through, embedded and identified. These are some of the best trainings in a variety of different areas. You can see some of the filters along the left-hand side of the screen here. We've also added a number of resources in different languages, and we are continuing to build out the language capabilities of our website, as well as trainings on our website in different languages. But you can go through and sort and search by a number of different trainings really to help, like I said, build your capacity as an organization. We have a great events page. We go through and pull off different events that are happening around the agency, ways just for you to get connected. If you're hosting an event, you're welcome to post it on our website as well. We have a really great news and insights blog where we talk about really important things that you need to know about how to partner with USAID, or even success stories of ways to get connected. So I've got a blog on the website called 7 Ways You Can Introduce Yourself to USAID. Just list off some ways that you can kind of make yourself known to the agency. So like I said, it's a really helpful tool for getting connected and kind of understanding the partnership process. And then we also have direct links to USAID's business forecast, funding opportunities on sam.gov and grants.gov, as well as a very extensive FAQ list. So we are continuing to build out the website on a regular basis, and we're hoping to add some new features and information to the website over the next couple of months and over the next couple of years. So encourage you to use it as a tool to really help build your organization's capacity and readiness to work with USAID. And then finally, just before we go into Q&A, I do want to just say, USAID, our door is open. Paul and I, we love to connect with new organizations. We love to meet with new organizations. We have a number of different ways that you can get connected, and we'll drop the links into the chat box in a second for you to get connected. But we have a Work with USAID newsletter that we send out updates on different events, kind of policies, new things happening in the agency. We also have a monthly Work with USAID newsletter. We also have a number of different social media channels. We're very active on social media, in particular LinkedIn. We'd encourage you to join our Work with USAID LinkedIn page. We go through every day on sam.gov and grants.gov and different platforms to find all the upcoming funding opportunities within the agency and post information there on a regular basis. And then finally, you can also contact me and my team at industryliaison@usaid.gov. A lot of what we do as a team is help to connect you, serve as sort of a liaison or front door to the agency. So, if you're interested in learning more about partnering with USAID, we're happy to meet with you one-on-one to talk with you in a little bit more detail about some of the things that we've talked about today, or help make introductions to other folks in the agency. So like I said, I really just want to highlight that our door is open. We love to hear from you and love to get connected to you, either through social media or different ways. So please feel free to reach out. With that, I want to, open it up to Q&A now. I don't know, Paul, you want to go through our Q&A box and help answer some of these questions?
Sure. And just a note, I did answer a couple of them just with written answers. So feel free to check those. Let's see. Okay. Can you give us an example of what an effective partnership with a local organization has looked like in the recent past?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that partnership worked, and what did the partner do well? This is a great question. So, I think it's interesting because, sometimes the same, in my opinion, the same would apply for a Washington-based awardee and a local awardee as well. But it really depends on the, on the organization. Sometimes when we think of local organizations, we think that they're inexperienced, and that's not what we're talking about, because a lot of times we work with local organizations that are incredibly experienced in the field. So it really just depends on the type of organization you're working with. When we talk about working with local organizations, the whole point is that they're embedded in the community. They have the connections. They have since they live there, they have the desire to want to see the change and want to see things work. So I think an effective partnership, it doesn't just apply to local organizations. I think just, having those, especially in like an assistance type of relationship where it's the grant or cooperative agreement, both organizations have the same end goals in mind. But also, I will say there is an element though that there are a lot of rules when it comes to federal awards, and there's a lot of things that have to be followed. So an understanding of the rules and the regulations. I don't mean rules, but like the regulations, the standard provisions of an award, what is required of the partner is super critical. So I think that's one of the things that outreach like this is trying to do, is how can we help build the capacity of local organizations and other organizations to understand the behemoth that is USAID, and just let people know that we are here to help, and we want to see all organizations be successful in what we do. So I know that doesn't exactly answer the question, but I'll kick it over to Matt for additional thoughts.
Yeah, I think, within a partnership, and I know this is a question that's, I think, later on down the road, does partnership always mean funding? And I think the answer to that is no. I think, outside of just sort of the funding process, I think when we typically talk about partnership, there is sort of that of, being effective and communicating and working together to implement a program. I think, we do really view things as like a partnership where we're coming together to achieve sort of a common goal or objective. And so I think you think about what does that look like for an effective partnership, but I think that's one area. But I think even before we get to the point of having a particular program or activity, and I think this is the big shift we're making now in the agency, is we want to hear from the local communities. We want to hear from local partners, what's happening on the ground, what are the challenges. We don't want it to just be that hey, USAID is sitting in the mission office designing programs or activities and not engaging with folks. And so we want to hear from local communities and local actors and be actively engaged, and really have them kind of lead and guide the programs and activities that we're going and doing. I think this can take place in a lot of different ways. A lot of our missions overseas are doing in-person events or even virtual events to connect with local staff to get their ideas and inputs. we do, I think we talked a little bit about this, but we kind of have a broader term called co-creation, where we try and invite in different ideas, actors, organizations through either industry days, either kind of formal or informal ways, kind of into the USAID process. And just last year, I think around 35% of every new funding opportunity had some level of co-creation, where we're inviting new ideas and inviting new organizations into the table to really help us kind of design and think through programs and activities. And so when I think about effective partnerships, I think it's really that engagement with one another, kind of back and forth, where there's an open dialogue about what are the challenges, what are the goals and objectives of what you're doing, what we're doing, and how we can work together. So.
I'm skipping around a little bit, but I did just want to answer this question. There's a question here. Just wondering how many concept notes are received on average every month, and how much of it is from non-traditional partners, and what percentage are considered. And I just want to point out, we only have a handful of opportunities in the agency that kind of accept concept papers on a rolling basis. And one of those is the development innovation partnerships that are ventures that we talked about earlier. Another is what's called the Global Development Alliance, which is typically when we partner with a private sector company who also brings leveraged funds to the table to do things. But so there's only a handful that we're like receiving on, and there's other, and if you might want to look this up as well, but there's something called unsolicited solutions for locally led development, which is pretty neat. It's a way to submit a concept for an idea you may have that isn't really being advertised by the agency. Most of the times when we're calling for concepts, it's because we want to do a project somewhere. So it's like we're submitting an RFA, or a request for application, on grants.gov, and we want to do an agriculture project in Kenya. So we want to receive concepts on what you would do. And in a typical case like that, we could receive 10 or we could receive 100. It really just depends on the work, the dollar value, and what the context is. So I hate to do it, but I'm going to give the very standard USAID answer: it depends for now. But we use those concepts, and this is why I say it's so important to submit them, because we use those concepts to then determine who we are going to ask for a full application from. So if you didn't submit a concept and you were still interested in the work, then you may have lost your opportunity on that specific RFA to then be able to be considered eligible to submit a full application, if that makes sense. So I just want to throw that out there. So please respond when you can.
Yeah, so I think one of the next questions down, it talks about the new partnerships initiative. And I think the question is, how can non-traditional and local partners connect with traditional US-based implementing partners? And I can offer a couple of ideas, and I know, Paul, if you want to offer as well. I mean, I think that was really one of the goals of our partner directory, is creating a space for organizations to connect with one another. So you can go on and look and identify USAID's existing partners, kind of US-based partners, and connect with them. You can message them directly there. We did earlier this year, we piloted a matchmaking session where we connected new local partners, I think around 33 new local partners with 12 of our kind of more traditional partners. That's a great way to get engaged. But there's also just a number of different online events, where there are industry days or other ways just to get connected. I was sharing with someone earlier, but I find that even on LinkedIn, I just feel like I find information about implementing partners all the time. Social media seems to be a great tool where there's a lot of information shared, and it's a great way to get connected there. One of the things that I will mention on workwithusaid.org we're working on is what we're calling a sub-partnership portal. We know that there's a lot of interest in being a sub-partner and working under kind of larger organizations. Right now, those are difficult to find. Everyone kind of has their own process, own way of kind of posting those different funding opportunities or ways to be a sub-partner. So we're creating a space on workwithusaid.org that I'm hoping, realistically, probably like early next year, we'll be able to launch it, but it'll be a space where traditional partners can come on, or any partner for that matter can come on and post when they're looking for sub-partners or other organizations to potentially partner with. So I think one of our big efforts, and one of the things we've heard from the community, is trying to create a space to connect organizations. And really, that's one of the things we're trying to do with workwithusaid.org. So I don't know if, Paul, if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right. I was going to say, again, just going back to using your networks, creating networks, is definitely the best way. I mean, even there's events like, the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization has their annual small business conference. You don't have to be a for-profit business to attend, and we have a lot of partners that show up to that. And that's a great way to network because people set up booths, and there's just all kinds of really good sessions. So just thinking about it that way too, like, just because I'm not a for-profit business doesn't mean I can't attend X, Y, and Z. I think that's important to consider too. There was another question about the establishment clause being a barrier to partnerships with faith-based actors. It's a very interesting question. I've actually thought about this, quite a bit myself. Separation of church and state. What are we funding? Faith-based actors. How are we doing this? And I think I think that the establishment clause is not a barrier, because we have an Office of Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships, which is hosted here at this event. So no, I don't think it's a barrier in that sense. What I do think is a barrier is the way USAID programs its funding dollars. And I think that there's never been money set aside. And because of competition requirements, you can't say in a solicitation, hey, I want to set this aside so that only faith-based actors can apply for this. We just can't do that as the federal government. So I think one way to target faith-based organizations is to, create programs that actually work in the areas where a lot of faith-based organizations work. And a lot of that is like community type organizations, smaller awards, and like the sense of like, I think meeting with the Accord Network one time, was eye-opening to me, because they were like, well, you have all these opportunities out there for like $10 million, and we can't handle $10 million or don't want it. We want maybe 500,000 to $1 million to do this. And so I think it's, about the agency kind of paring back and say, okay, yes, we have this office where we partner with faith-based organizations, which, I'll be honest, currently doesn't have much funding to do partnerships. So I think that's something that we're trying to change, going back to that congressional budget discussion we were talking about. But those are all things to consider for the future. And, I think we're doing our best to try to keep that engagement going and be able to partner more effectively with faith-based actors. So.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I know one of the earlier questions we got in is around capacity building trainings and support for smaller organizations and how to partner with USAID. And I think, I answered that a little bit with just our pre-engagement assessment and some of the tools and resources we have in our library. Now, I think, as you'll note, I think one of the things that's in there is around language for non-English speakers. A lot of it is mostly in English right now. My team has a request in for funding for this fiscal year to be able to translate everything on our website into French, Arabic, and Spanish. And so we're hoping that once we can get funding, we're able to do that. So we know that that's a big barrier for organizations, language issues. And so we're trying to find ways around some of those language challenges. I will note, I think a lot of our offices overseas are doing additional things in translation. So, for example, our office in Guatemala, Mission Guatemala, has been doing industry days in Spanish. They've been translating resources and materials into Spanish, and I think as well as looking at translating things into different Mayan languages to reach some of these different communities and organizations we're trying to partner with. So I think language is a big part of the conversation and topic of what we're doing now.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I think there's like a method to the madness, or a rhyme to the reason, or whatever you want to call it. That there's a reason that the English language has to be the prevailing language, because in a contract, for example, like disputes and things like that, you have to be able to revert back to something, and like not everything from English translates to local languages like it would other languages sometimes. So I think that's why it's in it's a sticking point, because it's actually in the Code of Federal Regulations 2 CFR 200 that the contract itself and the award itself has to be in English, right? So then further down the line in agency policy, it says that everything must be submitted in English, and English is the prevailing language. So of course, now that we wrote that in policy and there's that in 2 CFR 200, we spend 3 years discussing internally how we can make translations work, and here we are today. So it's something that we're talking about. Matt's team is definitely working on it as part of the new ANA strategy as well, our acquisition and assistance strategy. So it's definitely something top of mind, and yeah, thanks for bringing it up.
One of the questions that came in, can USAID partner with another NGO to fund a project of its own? I think the answer to that question is yes. I think we do oftentimes fund other projects, either through grants or other programs. I think often it comes down to like whether or not there's sort of alignment with that project and how it kind of meets what the agency is trying to achieve in that specific area. And I think Paul mentioned our locally led solutions unsolicited proposals application. That's oftentimes a great way to submit a project or get your project looked at for potential funding within the agency.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really like standard for us to. I think I don't know if the question is surrounding like co-funding, like USAID as a donor and then another NGO as a donor funding something else. In a sense, we do that through like leveraged funds and through cost share and things like that. But I mean, the traditional setup is that USAID is calling for applications for something, and we're going to fund an NGO directly. Now, whether other NGOs want to then, I've seen it to where other NGOs then contribute to that, and it's considered a leveraging contribution or a cost share. And it's used a lot in the private sector engagement world too, like I mentioned earlier. But yes, it definitely can and does happen. It's just not as common as the other way.
I know the next question is, how do you balance the value of co-creation and lack of funding for organizations available to participate in these processes prior to an award being granted? I don't know if you want to, I can start that one, Paul, or if you have any thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've learned a lot over the years, and I think co-creation became really popular at the agency, 2015, something like that, so 6 or 7 years ago. And in that sense, we were using co-creation kind of in the realm of like the broad agency announcements, which were for research and development. And at the beginning, I think we started using it as this tool where we would get all these organizations in a room together at a big conference, and then all co-create together and hire facilitators and do all that. And then, then there would be opportunities within that same thing to come back and do it again. And then I think we started realizing very quickly, like, oh, this is expensive for organizations to do. Like, and there's a lot that goes into it. And maybe these 30-person co-creations aren't really working for every opportunity we have. I mean, they work in some cases. So I think, the agency's doing a pretty good job, I think, of trying to like pare it down and just co-create individually, co-create with a smaller amount of organizations. I think, it wasn't always known like how much would go into it and how many co-creation sessions were needed. So I think that we've done a better job of kind of like, paring it down. I think there's still probably work to be done, but I think the virtual settings have probably helped a little bit. People aren't flying back and forth to attend these. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, Matt, if you have anything else to add, but I think the agency has gotten a little bit better at it. But the value of co-creation, in my opinion, it's just great, because I mean, as a former contracting officer and agreement officer, the only way we would typically I guess communicate with the applicant or whatever it was through writing. It's like we'd email and say, okay, now we have these 30 questions about your technical proposal, and then you would respond by like redoing that part of the application and then answering the questions, and then we do it again and again and again. And it's like the co-creation piece is just so invaluable, because you can just talk about it and it's an open space and you don't have to do that like kind of formal back and forth. So just knowing that, I do think that co-creation is super valuable, super helpful, especially to the technical teams that are reviewing the proposals. So yeah, but I mean, I do understand what you're saying about, so it is costly sometimes to a applicant.
Yeah, and I think I would just say, I think we've heard that message too from a lot of folks historically. I think back in 2017, Paul and I did an external listening tour. We met with hundreds of organizations externally. And the number one issue people brought up was this co-creation issue. They thought they understood the value of it, but the costs is oftentimes associated with it, or lack of information associated with it. So I think we've there's been a course correction. I'm sure there's still examples we can point out where it hasn't been perfect, but I think hopefully we're in a better space. And there's been a lot of guidance and resources that have been issued to USAID staff around better ways of doing it. The next question down is really about kind of the funding environment and supporting local organizations. And I think this maybe ties into a little bit of the local capacity strengthening policy, Paul. I don't know if you want to maybe talk a little bit about that, of how do we support local organizations in their organizational structure while also kind of addressing, the programs and activities. You're on mute right now.
Sorry about that. Hold on. Yeah, I'm just I'm reading through the question.
Yeah.
I'm a slow reader, sorry. Yeah, I mean, so USAID did just issue the local capacity strengthening policy. And in there, it addresses kind of 7 principles. Thank you, Alex, for sharing that. You're on it, like, boom. And we did share the principles there for, how to better build the capacity of local organizations to work with the agency. One of the things I think that is the next step in that is to then take that into, because it is, while it is a policy, it's not necessarily like, I'll call it codified into like the agency policy. It looks more like what I would call like a guidance document or a help document. And I think the next step, to answer the question, is what steps are we taking? And I think this is the first step in that right direction. The next step is going to be, how do we take this and actually put it into our agency policy, where it comes to like, our ADS 200 series, which talks about like designing programs, then our 300 series, which talks about acquisition and assistance. So I think once we start building this into the design of programs and keeping that in mind as part of like a main component of it, we're going to see strides in that area. So I mean, it's young, it's just coming out now, but I mean, I think it's a step in the right direction. So that's what we're doing to address it.
I think I would just note, I think a couple other things. I think if you go on our business forecast now, you can actually see some like local strengthening capacity contracts that are out there. And so I think our different missions and offices around the world, even regions, are taking different approaches to it. Some organizations are putting in a little bit extra funding into an activity, allow an organization to help build their capacity. Others are bringing in sort of third-party organizations that are, kind of experts in this to allow them to help train and build the organizations that the USAID is working with on other awards. And so I think it's taking different shapes and forms, really depending on the local context of how it's being done. But I think, one of the things in my 15 years at the agency, and we've working on localization for many years, I think one of the things that we don't want to do is build up organizations to be able to manage USAID funding, and then USAID funding dries up and the organization is no longer around. We want to build long-term sustainable organizations, and so not just building organizations that are ready or be able to work with USAID, but really building organizations that are able to stand on their own 2 feet and be able to run themselves even after USAID. So
that's great. And the next question on here is again, going back to a little bit of like the language preservation, but is more talking about how to preserve local culture. And I would just mention that USAID values local culture tremendously, and I think, but one thing that I'll say that I mentioned a little bit earlier is like, we're a little bit kind of bound by the world of federal US federal regulations. And sometimes that can be a tricky thing to navigate. And we don't want it to come across as being, not, wanting to preserve local culture and things like that. So it's not really anything about that. And I think the missions especially keep that into consideration in almost everything they do, because so many of the staff that work there are from the communities that they're serving, So I think I just wanted to mention that it's not because we're intolerant or we don't care. It's because we just have these, the regulations were written, I think, mostly to accommodate like US organizations, because that's what the bulk of the federal government does. I mean, we have to remember all these regulations and things that are written are applicable to the whole entire government, of which USAID is just a small portion of the funding dollars that come out of there. So taking that into mind, I mean, I think we try to we try to do things surrounding this topic on like through our own agency policy and guidance documents and help documents that come out. So I just want to say, like, we are addressing it, and I think especially as we push for localization and all that, you'll see more of that coming out.
I think that I just add, I think, one of the things I'm a part of is the agency's diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility work. And I think that's a huge effort, not only in just who we hire in the agency, but also how we partner. And so, there's a number of like draft documents of like guiding principles of how do we do no harm in the work that we're doing? How do we promote and preserve local cultures? And so I think it's been a vital part of the conversation and everything we're doing related to localization. So. I don't know the question on international tax regulations. I don't know, Paul, as a former contracting officer, if you know that one.
You know what? I actually don't have a great answer for that. Unfortunately, I'm sorry. I know somebody that in our financial management office would probably be able to answer it better. Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. I don't really have. I think there's a lot of different areas, topic areas on international tax regulations. I mean, so yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know where to go with that one. Unless you want to be more specific on like an actual topic or a situation you've run into.
Yeah, I know, on that particular one, it just depends on the country by country. Oftentimes we have our legal office that gets involved in those depending on the tax issues in a particular country. So.
Yeah, and we also have, different agreements with different countries too when it comes to tax law. And some countries we don't have any agreement with, so it gets a little more sticky. But I mean, I think there are, I think now I'm recalling like at one point running into this issue because there was like a tax memorandum or something with the government of like Zambia or something, and like we couldn't do something because it hadn't been signed yet. I don't know. I don't have much experience with it, so I apologize.
We really appreciate all of the great questions that folks have asked. I do just want to reiterate, I'm going to type in my team's email address, which is industryliaison@usaid.gov in the chat box. We love hearing from you. We love getting these kind of questions and love to connect with you afterwards. So I know we covered a lot, and hopefully maybe as a recap, we can send out some of the links and things that we shared as a part of this event, but we really appreciate you taking the time to connect with us and learn a little bit more about partnering with the agency. Just as a reminder, there is a closing keynote that's coming up at 2:30, so in about 20 minutes. So I think you have a little bit of a break now before you want to join back on to the webinar, but thank you again so much for joining, and look forward to hearing from you and connecting with you again in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Great to talk to you.